Arsenal easily defeat Paris Saint-Germain to put their first 3 points of the UEFA Champions League phase on the board. That Havertz-Trossard combination is just beautiful to watch, isn't it? As for the second goal, well, it was always going to come from a set piece, wasn't it? You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, Harry Symeou, and on today's episode, we're going to look back on that comfortable win over Paris Saint-Germain. Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're all good. Hope you're all well. Welcome back to the pod. Happy Wednesday to each and every one of you. Not quite the miserable day that it was yesterday here in London. It's still not great. It's still grey. It's still a little bit cold. I'm expecting that there'll be some rain in a bit when I leave the house, because that's what happens, right? It's fine. It's bearable. Nobody's stressing too much about the weather until they need to leave the house. And whenever I need to leave the house, it just starts chucking it down, the heavens open. I mean, I set off yesterday to go to Arsenal and I got absolutely soaked on the way. Absolutely soaked, even with an umbrella. But hey, that's enough moaning about the weather, because we've got a very professional performance to discuss. Arsenal 2-0 victors over Paris Saint-Germain. We'd only ever beaten PSG once before, and that was back in 1994 on the way to our Cup Winners' Cup victory that year. And Kevin Campbell scored the winning goal at Highbury that day. That might be his most precious goal in an Arsenal shirt. And I got to admit, when I was reading that ahead of the game and I saw it, and obviously, you know, I knew Kevin personally, and, you know, we spoke a lot about him when he sadly passed away. That kind of really got me. You know, it did. You know, everybody knows what a legend Kevin Campbell was off the pitch, because that really did come across. On the pitch, I think there's a generation of us like myself that don't really remember him playing for the Arsenal. When I was growing up, Kevin Campbell was playing for Everton. So when you get kind of reminders of how important he was in Arsenal's history as well, that's always really nice. And I had to incorporate that in my commentary notes. I had to get it into my match intro, and I did. And I'm really pleased that I was able to do that, because yeah, it pulled on a heartstring for me. Before we get into the game, I want to say a massive thank you to every single one of you, by the way, who sent me a message or replied to any of my posts. Because as you'd have seen on social media, I got the opportunity for the first time to do the TV commentary for Arsenal on a UEFA Champions League night. Now, I'd done games before in the Premier League, first team games. I'd done a couple previously. Lots of under 21 games, but it's not the same. And then to actually be up in the TV gantry at Emirates Stadium under the lights on a Champions League night and alongside a brilliant co-commentator in Perry Groves was really, really special to me. And someone gave me this advice when I first changed careers, when I first started working in football and first started getting into kind of press rooms and press conferences and things like that. A very good friend of mine, someone whom I respect incredibly, said to me, you know what the key is, Harry? You got to act like you're meant to be here. You got to act like you belong here, rather than that kind of kid that's really excited and gassed up to be in an environment that they could only dream of being in a few years prior. But every now and again, it comes through. Like, that kid inside me comes through. And last night it came through. I was so excited. And just as the teams were coming out of the tunnel, because that's when we pick up the Arsenal TV commentary, as the teams are coming out, I had this feeling of like real excitement, but mixed with nervousness as well, because you're kind of so desperate to nail it. Now, I haven't watched the game back yet. It is available on arsenal.com for anybody that wants to watch the game back. Not because they want to listen to me, but if they want to watch the game back. And obviously, if you watch it back via arsenal.com or the Arsenal app, it's me and Perry Groves on commentary. But yeah, I haven't watched the game back in its entirety. I probably will, because I like to go back through games and sort of be really critical of myself and try and figure out what I think I could do better. But just, yeah, what a moment. And I'm so thankful to everybody who sent me messages and people that have obviously been following the journey from when the podcast started to kind of where we are today. It's amazing, and lucky to work with some really cool and amazing people, and I'm so grateful to all of them, and to Arsenal Football Club, of course, in particular Georgia at Arsenal, for the opportunity that she gave me yesterday to do it on the big stage. And yeah, I loved it. I loved every single minute of it. Let's go over to the live chat and see what you guys are saying before we dive into the ins and outs of the victory over Paris Saint-Germain. Gunner329 says, got my wish of a clean 2-0 win. Surprised how relaxed I felt all game. Now, if you go back to the show that we dropped yesterday, the Tuesday show, guess what I predicted? 2-0. Yeah, I've been pretty good with my predictions this season so far. Probably will go wrong over the next few weeks, and I'll be back down to a level where nobody cares what I have to say. Not that you care now, but you get where I'm going with that. So many of you in the live chat. I'm not going to say hello to every single person, because if I do that, we'll just end up doing nothing else. I will say, though, hello to Goon Gang FC, AFC, I beg your pardon, who says, sitting in Heathrow, about to fly back to the States. Absolutely lovely seeing the lads silence those Parisian drums. Great to see you behind the mic too. Thank you so much, mate. And yeah, it was a really, really comfortable performance. And another thing for a minute, like just imagine what a world looks like where there is no referee who wants to be the star of the show, where the referee actually goes out there to referee the game and let the game breathe as much as possible and tries to have as little influence over it as he possibly can. Slavko Vincic was the referee yesterday, Slovenian referee. And yeah, we're not talking about him, are we? In the way that we talk about Chris Kavanagh, or the way that we talked about Michael Oliver, or any of the others, really. Jared Gillett. There's a load of them all. There's no Dermot Gallagher on your TV screens this morning telling you that the referee got something that was clearly wrong, absolutely right. Just imagine a world where the referees aren't the stars of the show. I guess what? It's the Champions League. It's any league that isn't the Premier League, basically. Yeah, anyway. So on the performance, generally speaking, when I left Emirates Stadium yesterday, obviously I was buzzing because of what I just got to do. But on my way home, I was a little bit torn on what I thought about the performance. I was torn between saying we didn't play that well, but also it was super professional in terms of the way that we went out there. We found what PSG's weakness was. Our high press was something that they couldn't live with. And we know that Luis Enrique, as we discussed on the preview pod, has very, very clear principles. And he was never, under any circumstances, going to veer away from his style of play. I told you guys in the build-up that we'd win 2-0, first and foremost, but I also told you that there'd be long periods where we wouldn't have the ball, and that's exactly how it played out, because I've seen PSG under Luis Enrique. They went to the Champions League semi-finals last season. He won the competition with Barcelona back in the 14-15 season. Luis Enrique is a coach that's been on the scene for such a long time that we all kind of know what we're going to get from him. He's got a very clear style, and the identity of his teams really does come through. And yeah, so no surprises in terms of that. But we went out there, we got our couple of goals in that first half. I think they were about 16 minutes apart. And after that, we kind of knew where we were, and we knew that we didn't need to take any major risks. We kind of kept PSG at arm's length. You know, those videos, those memes that you see where there's like a big guy and he's got his hand out and he's holding the head of the guy that's trying to punch him. He's just kind of swinging, but he couldn't make any contact. That's basically what we did to PSG after our second goal. I prefer to go with the second of my two statements, which is that we were really, really professional. Underwhelming, I felt that a little bit at times in the game. I felt the start of the game was a little bit slow, but that was from both sides. And I think what it is, right, is we are used to watching Premier League football on a weekly basis where it's super intense, it's super high tempo, everything's done really fast, and it's very ferocious in the way that it's played. And then you flip to the European scene, and actually it's almost like a different sport in that, you know, teams don't play the same way. Officials are slightly different in the way that they officiate the game. So there's a lot of things that differ between a Premier League game against Leicester City, which turned into a right ding-dong in the end, and a UEFA Champions League game where it's a bit more tactical. It's a bit less, I think, about intensity, and it's a bit more about the tactical intricacies of the game. And I think sometimes it takes us a bit of time to adjust our mindset to that. So like that underwhelming feeling that I had based on parts of our performance, when I think about it today, I'm kind of like, well, no, that's how you play that game. That's the way you do it. And having that adaptability and being able to flip between Premier League and European football mode, I think is really, really important. And it's probably something that we struggled with in the past, if we're being completely honest about things. So, yeah, happy with the performance overall. Both teams, as I say, were probably feeling each other out at the beginning, but eventually we found the weaknesses, we found the chinks in the armour, and we went and we exposed them, and we got ourselves into a very commanding position before the break that meant in the second half we could just be a little bit more reserved in the way that we went about things and take our foot off the gas just a little bit. Unchanged 11 from the side that, of course, beat Leicester City at the weekend. No real surprises there. The only worry was, would Calafiori be fit? He was. And, of course, he played at left back in the first half, but at right back in the second half. At times, Ricardo Calafiori in that first period was playing like a 10. I couldn't figure out what on earth he was doing. Like, I talked about the fact that he brings us a different dynamic in attack on a recent episode. We talked at length about why, for instance, Martinelli seems a lot more effective with him in the team rather than with a more kind of defensive-minded fullback. And, yeah, we talked a lot about him inverting, and we talked a lot about him going into that midfield to create an overload alongside Rice, alongside Partey. But what we saw last night was a far more adventurous Ricardo Calafiori, a Ricardo Calafiori that was willing to go into the number 10 role at times. And in the press conference, I don't know if you guys have watched it back on online, on Haters TV or anywhere else that's put it out, but I was in the press conference and I asked Mikel Arteta the question. I said to him, Mikel, we're used to seeing your fullbacks invert. We're used to seeing your fullbacks come in field and play in a kind of defensive midfield role. But Ricardo Calafiori at times looked like he was playing as a 10. Was that something you instructed him to do, or was that something that he kind of took upon himself to do? And Mikel Arteta's response was along the lines of this. I'm kind of paraphrasing. If you want to go and check out the press conference, you'll hear exactly what he had to say. But from memory, at least, he said, well, we know he's got the capacity to do that. He's been doing that in Italy, drifting forward, causing problems for teams in an attacking sense. He's really, really brave. I think he said he doesn't care about anything, but I think what he meant is that nothing really phases him. And so he's not afraid to take those risks and those gambles. And you saw that, didn't you? You saw it in that first period. Less so in the second half when he was playing on the right-hand side and he was obviously a little bit less comfortable there. We'll talk about Ricardo Calafiori defensively as well, because I didn't think he was immaculate defensively yesterday. In fact, I've never thought that he's been immaculate defensively. I think he's good enough to tuck in and be part of a defensive unit when you need him to. And he's good enough to go forward and get involved in build-up play. And so he's almost exactly what we're looking for, in the sense of we had Zinchenko, who on the ball was superb, but off it was at times terrible and left us really, really vulnerable. And now we've got someone who's a little bit more balanced in terms of abilities on the ball, abilities and capabilities off the ball. So I really like Ricardo Calafiori. There was a couple of times in this first half where he was struggling with Achraf Hakimi. I was speaking to my dad about that this morning, and he was like, yeah, I'm not totally convinced. Achraf Hakimi gave him a hard time. And I'll say to you guys exactly what I said to my dad. When Achraf Hakimi is in full flow, there's very few players in the world that can A, keep up with him, and B, keep him quiet for an entire 90 minutes. He's one of the best attacking fullbacks in world football. I don't think there's any question about that. So I'm not going to judge Ricardo Calafiori struggling on a couple of occasions with him too harshly. I don't think that's analysis that we need to do, really. And then, of course, on around about 20 minutes, Arsenal go and break the deadlock. And it was brilliant play from Trossard. He comes down that left-hand side. He just checks inside onto the right foot. And he looks up and he knows the area that he needs to put the ball in. He knows exactly where Kai Havertz is going to be. He knows what Kai Havertz wants. And he puts it into an area that says to Kai Havertz, go on then, go and get your head on the end of this and see what you can make of it. And again, going back to a press conference that took place pre-season when we played Bayer Leverkusen, I asked Mikel Arteta about that relationship between Trossard and Havertz and how he thought that was developing. And he said, yeah, really, really well. He said they both know how to play the false nine role, even though that might not be the position that they've always played throughout their careers. And because they both have a really good understanding of what's required, they've formed a really, really good relationship. And that was another example of it. we looked like we were playing a 4-4-2 for large periods of last night's game. Sometimes Trossard would go slightly further forward. At times, we'd press forward with both of them. I think that was because we knew that PSG were going to play in a certain way. You wouldn't have seen that, for example, against Man City, where it was a bit more of a kind of 4-4-1-1. Against Tottenham, similar thing. You know, Havertz was dabbling in and out between midfield and attack and trying to help out in those areas as well. So it was a bit different yesterday in the sense of it was more of a 4-4-2, and I think we looked at what PSG were going to do, and we decided that was the best course of action. And I'm delighted for Kai Havertz. That's 3 games in a row that he scored now for Arsenal. I think it's 6 goals in 6 games at Emirates Stadium, which is really, really good. And I put a tweet out yesterday where I said, it's mad to me that just months ago, I had to defend the signing of Kai Havertz to not just fellow Arsenal fans, but to the kind of wider world. Every platform I went on, every radio conversation I had, it was always, oh, well, you need a proper striker. And yeah, in an ideal world, we'd like to have a player that contributes 25, 30 goals a season. But Kai Havertz has been so incredibly effective and so incredibly useful to this Arsenal side, and the fact that he can play in so many different ways has helped us, because look, it was always going to be that when Odegaard picked up that injury, Kai Havertz's importance would increase, and his ability to play as a centre forward but also to drop into that slightly deeper role, to play as a second striker, has allowed us to find a different way of playing that has meant that during this period without Martin Odegaard, up until now, we've coped, and we've coped quite well. Have we always been at our swashbuckling best? Have we always played the Arsenal way, if you like? No, we haven't. We've had to adapt, and we've had to change things ever so slightly, but we've been really, really effective. And then, of course, the second goal came from Bukayo Saka's delivery. Now, this was just a little bit of insight for those of you that are interested. If you're not interested, I apologise, but I'm going to tell you this anyway. One of the hardest things for a commentator during a game like that, because obviously you know that the goals in a Champions League game are big moments, right? And you're desperate to nail them. You can do all the prep in the world, but you can't script what's going to happen. So you can have all the knowledge, you can have all the background, you can have everything, as prepared as possible, but you got to nail those moments. And I'm not even saying that I nailed it, by the way. I'll let other people judge that, but when Saka whipped that free kick in, I was kind of just behind Saka, from where I could see in the gantry. And as it went through, I have to make a decision at that point. Did it take a touch off Martinelli? Did it take a touch off Thomas Partey? Or did it go right in? And you kind of have to go based on your instinct. Now, obviously, you've got time to correct yourself if the replay shows otherwise. But I sort of took a gamble and said, it's gone straight in. Because that's what my gut told me. And thankfully, I was right. Bukayo Saka contributed. It was only his second goal of the season, interestingly. He, of course, has one goal in the Premier League this season, but 5 assists. So he's been really impactful, really important. But he's been more of a provider for Arsenal this season than anything else. So I was delighted to see him get on the score sheet with that one. Guys, just a quick reminder before we continue, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel. If you're new, if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review as well, as I mentioned, especially on Apple Podcasts, where we're struggling for those at the moment because, as I said, we lost the load when we took the podcast out of a network and went independent. So if you could do that for me again, even if you've done it in the past, hopefully they'll re-register and we can get back to what we should be showing in terms of reviews for those that are looking for podcasts, looking for something to listen to. It really, really does help. Also, don't forget to check us out on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/The Chronicles of Aguna. The link is in the description below. Not only did we drop the match day reaction, which is a short piece reacting to a game within the first hour or so of its conclusion yesterday. We also did the latest In Focus episode where we honed in on Declan Rice, and I thought that was a really interesting conversation to have. Interested to get you guys' thoughts on that. If you want to check it out, remember, visit us on Patreon and sign up. Just before we move on to the second half and touch on a couple of other points, I do have to tell you that this podcast is brought to you by the good people over at NordVPN. NordVPN is the best VPN service out there. It's a service that I myself have plenty of experience using, and you can sign up now via the link below. Visit nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC for a mega discount and 4 months free at the end of your plan. With NordVPN, not only do I have extra protection when surfing the web, downloading and streaming, but I also have the ability to change my virtual location with the click of a button. That means I can access content that's geo-blocked, use streaming services not available in the UK, and when I'm traveling, I'm able to log into Sky Go, TNT Sports, on Discovery Plus or whatever it is, and BBC iPlayer, meaning I don't miss a beat. Sign up now via nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC and take advantage of this amazing offer. There's not long to run on it, by the way. Plus, with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, it's totally risk-free. You won't regret it, I promise. Visit nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC, and we thank them for their support of the podcast. Okay. Let's move on to that second half. Let's touch on a couple more points, and then I'll take some of your thoughts from the live chat. If you've got any questions, start getting them in. Pop a queue at the beginning. It makes it much easier for me to pick them out. I guess the one negative from last night and the one kind of concern that we have coming away from the game was that obviously Jurrien Timber, who, by the way, had an excellent first half. He was really good. He won duels. He was really aggressive in the way that he marked Bradley Barcola, who I highlighted as one of the kind of danger men going into this game. He did such a good job of dealing with him and marshalling him and limiting him really to nothing in that first period, if we're being completely honest. And you're looking at it and you're thinking, this is another kind of coming-of-age performance from Jurrien Timber. And I said it after the Leicester game. I said it after the City game as well. I am convinced now that although he has played the majority of his career as a centre-back, Jurrien Timber's best position is at right-back. Now, I'm not saying that you bomb Ben White out of the team, because I think he's been great for a number of years now and he deserves that respect. But Mikel Arteta has another option now, a real viable option, an option that can come in and does not see us lose anything on the ball in the way that, for example, as good a defender as he is, Tomiyasu does. Tomiyasu, in terms of solidity, would be one of the first names on my team sheet. But he does lack something on the ball. He does lack something in possession. And that's the difference between being a good player and an elite player. Now, Jurrien Timber, for me, is showing himself to be an elite player. And he's still so young. He's got so much more room for growth, which is really, really encouraging. But I'm adamant now that his best position is at right back. Not at left back, at right back. Can he do a job at centre-back? Of course he can. Can he do a job at left-back? Of course he can. We've seen that already. But there's just something different about Jurrien Timber at right-back. He seems to have a lot more confidence in terms of stepping out and being that bit more aggressive. And that comes from playing on your stronger side. That's natural, I think. But you can see the difference between Timber, the right-back, and Timber when he plays anywhere else. And for me, it's absolutely imperative that we have the ability to rotate both him and Ben White, because look, Timber was out for a long, long time and obviously went off at the break yesterday and we were concerned. Arteta did say in the press conference after the game that he felt something muscular and that there was no way he was going to take a risk because of how long he's been out for, which I think is sensible management. Hopefully that's all it is, just a precautionary thing, and he can be back and available at the weekend. But to not have to play Ben White every single minute of every single game, and the same with Jurrien Timber, given that White, we know, has played through the pain barriers on numerous occasions, and Timber is still, whether people want to admit it or not, recovering from this long-term absence and layoff that he had due to a knee injury. It's good to have those options. It's good to be able to change it. It's good to be able to rotate. And both of them can be cover options for William Saliba. Now, look, Saliba's great, and you want him to play every time he's available and every time he's fit. But again, he's not superhuman, and at some point, it might catch up with him. So you need those options, and Timber coming into that defence has been magnificent. He really, really has. This was the first time that Mikel Merino was in a matchday squad for the Arsenal, and he got on in the second half. Won a few duels. What did I say? Fuel duels. He won a few duels, Mikel Merino. Made a few really good slide tackles. Won the ball back on a few occasions for Arsenal. I thought he looked a touch off the pace, but that's completely understandable, right? He played at the Euros, didn't really get a pre-season, was all ready to go for us, and then suffered that injury in training, in his first training session, which sidelined him for a period of time. He's back now, and I think over time we can start building him up and integrate him into the team. Don't know if he starts straight away. Don't know if he's someone that Mikel Arteta will want to bring on for 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there to try and get him to that level where he's ready. He's got to familiarise himself with the patterns of play, with the system. And I know he would have been sitting in on all the meetings and studying and making sure that he understands the theory behind it. But it's another thing, I think, to go out and do it. So really, really impressed by how quickly he's recovered from this problem. And I can't wait to see him play a part for this Arsenal side moving forward. As I say, did he look brilliant yesterday? I wouldn't go as far as that. I thought he looked competent, which is all I'm expecting really from a player who's been out as long as he has. And slowly we will build him up. But what a night to make your debut under the lights in the Champions League against Paris Saint-Germain, who I can't say we dominated, right? Because they had loads of the ball and, they looked comfortable for large periods of the game, but they looked comfortable at points where we were already in front. So, yeah, maybe they kept us at arm's length to a point as well. But I think that was partly because we weren't pushing it. We weren't forcing the issue. We knew where we were. We knew that we had the victory in the bag, and it was just about consolidating and just about seeing that through. Nothing else really mattered at that point in the game. If I go back to just the match statistics, the overall match statistics, I'm just loading them up. Bear with me a second. Match stats, here we go. Arsenal at home, 35% of the possession only. PSG had 65% of the ball. They had 10 shots, we had 6. They had 26 touches inside our box, we had 22 inside theirs. They had 5 corners, we had 1 corner all game. So the statistics say that if not dominant, because we definitely weren't dominant, we were at least efficient. We had, and I'll just have a quick look at this, 5 shots on target, scored 2 goals. I don't even think you can count Bukayo Saka's free kick as a shot, really. He was definitely crossing that in, wasn't he? But yeah, look, it just goes to show that if you can't have all of the ball or the lion's share of possession, which you're rarely going to have against a Luis Enrique side, let alone a really talented one like this PSG side, then you got to be efficient when you do have it, and you got to make sure that you can stop their possession developing into anything sinister or dangerous. And we did a really, really good job of that. And so even though I was a bit torn going into this pod around whether or not I thought that we were underwhelming or really professional, I think I've talked myself around to the side of actually we were really professional, and it's something that we should be really proud of. I think when we get Martin Odegaard back, there will probably be an upturn in the number of touches that we're having in the opposition box, in terms of the possession that we're having, because we play through him. He is the guy that we funnel everything good that we do in an attacking sense through. So I'm well aware that, in his absence, we've had to rethink and we've had to change it up a little bit. Now, there's a really good question in the chat from Jimmy Flo, and I'll come on to some other questions in a minute. It's just this one is relevant to the point I'm making. He says, does it worry you that we have very low ball possession against the big teams? Honestly, mate, no, it doesn't. It would have done in the past because I never had any faith in our defensive unit to stand firm when under pressure and to be able to withstand the pressure that teams will put on you when they have the lion's share of possession. But nowadays, I feel so confident in that defensive unit that I'm far more comfortable with teams having more possession. Now, I'd rather that we had more possession than we're having at the minute, because I think, people often talk about the significance of possession. And I think, well, actually, you can't concede a goal if you've got the ball, can you? Well, you can, but you'd have to be pretty stupid or pretty bad to do that. So the point I'm trying to make here is that when you've got the ball, the opposition doesn't score. So obviously, I'd prefer that we had the ball. And obviously, when you've got the ball, you have more chance of scoring yourself. I'd prefer that we had more possession in an ideal world, but I also recognise that during a period where we're without, I would say, our best player, our most important player, our captain, and when we've had a lot of really tough, difficult games against real top-level opposition, all in a real short space of time, we've leaned on our strength. And our strength is in our defensive capability. That's our biggest strength. This Arsenal side, yeah, they're good going forward, but their biggest strength is their ability to keep opponents at bay. So why not lean on that during a time where you're not at your best, and make sure that that provides you the platform to go on and potentially win games? Because if you defend well, you only need one moment, whether that comes from a set piece, from a good bit of play, from a counter-attack. Defensive solidity, first and foremost, will always give you a chance. And that's what we're doing right now. We're leaning on that strength in order to go on and win football matches. Let's take a couple more of your questions. Goongang AFC: with Benjamin White being utilised in multiple positions by Brighton, including midfield, do you think Arteta may explore alternate roles for him to help boost our overall depth? Yeah, it's an interesting one because when we signed him, I thought he'd be used in multiple positions. When we signed Zinchenko, I thought there'd be times where we used him in midfield, and that hasn't really happened. So, you know, it's tough to say whether or not Mikel Arteta is going to go down that route. I personally would trust Ben White in a number of positions. I'd trust him at centre-back, obviously. I'd trust him at right-back. I'd trust him in a deep-line midfield position as well. So, yeah, that's at least 3 positions I've given you where I'm happy for him to play. I don't know that Mikel Arteta would use him in the midfield. I think he would definitely use him at right-back, as we've seen, because we know that that's what he does mainly. But he'd definitely use him at centre-back as well if he needed to. And that's about as far as it goes with Ben White, I think, at least in Mikel Arteta's eyes. Now, I personally have faith in him and trust in him to do more than that, but I think that's where Arteta is at. John Daly says, with Ethan Nwaneri not getting any minutes, do you think that we'll see him start this Saturday against Southampton? That's a really, really interesting point. Personally, I think you go with the same team. I think you lean on, I'm talking about leaning on strengths when we're talking about us defensively. Another strength right now in the current iteration of Arsenal is the Havertz and Trossard combination. So I'm not sure I'd break that up going into the game, but I think he'll certainly get minutes. I think he'll get some minutes and an opportunity again to show what he can do at Premier League level. Khalid says, not a question really, but Kivior was quite good when coming on for Timber. Yeah, Kivior is always solid defensively, I think. I think he's a player that sometimes gets a bad rap from sections of the Arsenal fan base, and I've never really understood why. What I will say, though, about Jakub Kivior is that I think a bit like when we were talking about Tomiyasu, yeah, solid defensive option, but maybe just a little bit lacking when it comes to the technical aspects and what he offers you on the ball. So that's probably why he is where he is in the pecking order, if you like. Okay, I think I am going to leave it there. I'll just summarize by saying a very professional display, a very, very good result. I'm not even going to bother looking at this abomination of a 36-team league table. I'm not sure what I make of the format just yet. I said it to you guys on the show that we did yesterday that I'm going to reserve judgment for a bit and see how it goes. But I didn't really feel there was that jeopardy there last night, and that kind of takes away from the spectacle, I think, a little bit. And I think neutrals will probably say the same. I mean, for us, we play against a good team. We're always going to want to test ourselves and see how we fare against them. If you're a neutral, though, you sit down to watch Arsenal PSG, would it have been more intense had it been a group game where we dropped points in our first game? Yeah, it probably would have. So although we've got more in terms of the volume of these big games in this league phase than we had in the group stages, you take away some of the jeopardy, which then impacts, I think, the product anyway. So, yeah. Again, still not totally sure how I feel about this format. Time will tell. We'll see. Before I go, if I could ask you to help us get up to 100 likes on the live stream, I'd be really, really appreciative if you could do that. If you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review, guys, as well. Thank you, as always, for your continued support of the podcast. I will see you all on Thursday with another edition of the Chronicles of a Gooner. Check out nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC. Check us out on Patreon. Check out our Declan Rice piece in which we talked about whether or not Arsenal are getting the best out of him at the moment. I think that's up for debate. I really, really do. Check it out. You've been listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner with me, Harry Symeou. Thank you again for all your kind wishes and kind comments, and I'll see you all on the next one. Until then, goodbye.